Hello. Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, super thrilled to have you and your team at ACIR on campus today. And before our listeners over here, would you mind telling us what ACIR stands for?
Yes, it's Allergy, Clinical Immunology, Rheumatology.
Sounds like a lot of great words for a lot of our science students that would be interested.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to join us in this conversation today and giving that advice back to students. So I'll dive right into the questions. Can I ask, so what do you value the most when it comes to your initial interactions with students and recent graduates?
I think what I value the most is catering my answers to what their career trajectory is. So my first question is always, what do you have planned in the next 5 years? Right? And majority of people have an ABC backup plan. Some people don't, and that's fine. I think what's valuable is rather having a cookie cutter speech and making it about your organization. I find that you cater your response based on what step somebody is at. They may receive the information differently, or they'll be completely closed off to it because you're like wah 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 wah. So I really try to cater that to give value to what they're asking, basically.
Well, I think, and I'm sure a lot of students really appreciate that because it's easy to come into a fact sheet, but being able to really personalize those responses, I'm sure can really elevate that experience for both students and hopefully on your end as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. And can I ask, so in terms of that interaction with students, how important is a student's elevator pitch to you? And if it is important, would you mind sharing an example?
Yeah, I think it is. It depends on the employer. If it's extreme and the philosophy and the mission statement of the organization. If they're high volume, competitive, they have a revolving door, I think your elevator pitch is very, very important. And then you have to cater it to what the company's or organization's mission and value statement. That's very important. And I feel like a lot of people just give general idea of how they are, kind of like how me and you talk, what's your favorite color, things like that. I'm just making up an example, right?
Yeah.
So as an employer or an organization, I'll be like, okay, how does me knowing your favorite color gonna help me? What are you gonna do what are you gonna bring to my table? But sometimes you may not have transferable skills, and that's fine. I find that if you're able to have a good attitude and willing to have grit, meaning hard work, you're flexible. So right off the bat, if you're already saying, this position is not really gonna work. Do you guys kind of work weekends? Like nobody works weekends.
Right.
Find time on the weekday. That shouldn't be your starting question or answer. So
Right.
yes, elevator pitch is very important. Cater it.
Yeah.
But some organizations are more forgiving than others.
Yeah.
And I'm saying don't structure. Sometimes people say structure your response to the organization, but sometimes you need to see if they're a good fit for you too.
Yeah.
I think we spend 8 hours at work every single day once we get to that point. And it's going to be very draining if that organization's mission and value statement is not in alignment with who you are as a person.
Yeah, no, I think you made a lot of really important points in that answer. And I think that, as you said, the elevator pitch would really depend on the employer. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like in ACIR, that would be super important. And it also goes back into the idea of doing that research and, knowing what the mission and vision is. And, I think that you make some really important points there. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, certainly.
And can I ask, so in terms of that interaction with students, how can they stand out and become memorable to you, especially at a high volume event like the Get Hired Fair?
Yeah, so I would be from my perspective, like working in healthcare, if you come to me and you can answer, you're like, oh, I know this disease. I'll be like, wow, you're already ahead, right? So, I know about this product, something like their top product or their top services, right? So a lot of the vendors here are service delivery or product delivery, and majority of them are patient-facing. So if you already know what services and products they offer, then you come in of those skills that you can beef up your resume, basically, or your CV, right? But if you're coming in and you're saying, oh, what are you looking for? Tell me a little about your your organization and you just hand over a resume, that's not going to make you memorable.
Yeah.
And it's also forced interaction. Like everybody has gone through it, and I don't blame us, because like literally when I first started off, I was so awkward, and I would make like these awkward phases and jokes, but I got better because I did more public speaking. I literally recorded myself in front of a camera and was basically practicing how I talked. I would replay that and I'd be like, I don't like that. I'm gonna like change the way I talk. So I think it's practicing in front of a mirror, practicing in front of a video, and then also listen to. It's more of the communication. It's not the message. It's how your body language is and how you communicate, right? So, internet is free. Well, you know what I mean. So Google it. Google people who are communication coaches. I think that's very valuable. Rather than obviously do your research on the organization, but then also execute it properly. So communication is execution, right? So if you pick up on like small soft skills on how to stand out as a candidate by just simply doing hand gestures, looking at them in the eye, and it becomes more natural, then people will remember you more.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's that's super important, especially when it comes to, really hearing yourself speak. And like you said, that video recordings can actually really help with that, because you can see all of the little things that you're not hearing when you're speaking. So I think that's actually really great advice, and hopefully students are willing to, go out and research some of those communication coaches, because again, like experts are kind of able to give you that insight a little bit more. So
exactly.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And can I ask, so in terms of your hiring process at ACIR, do you use any technology when it comes to screening candidates, like applicant tracking systems, for instance? And if so, how can a student stand out in that?
So we're kind of equivalent. So when in healthcare, we invest more of our money into patient-facing software. In regards to recruiting and hiring, as of now, I do think we do need development in that space, but how we do it is basically going through Indeed, word of mouth, leveraging reputable institutions like here or universities to help with the hiring process and using their software and portals already implemented, because the user experience is more seamless, right? But internally, of course, like everyone talks about AI and how to weed out certain candidates, I find that the more popular platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn, they do have certain engines that help with the AI stuff to help you weed out certain candidates. So I think that's how far we've gotten.
Okay.
But if there's something out there that I don't know of, I would love to learn and implement. But then again, it has to come down to being cost effective, right? For the organization.
For sure. It's always kind of a balance when it comes to cost and also the quality of what you're trying to do. And can I ask, so in terms of Indeed and some of those platforms that you used, what can a student do to not be weeded out, as you said?
That's a good one. Stick to one page.
Okay.
And then really cater, sometimes we're so... And I've been down this path. We're so discouraged sometimes that it's like, what's the point of customizing my resume and stuff? Sure, you can't customize it to each position, to each organization. Pick an industry, niche it down to what software they're using. So right now, everyone is using different, like certain softwares, right? I would definitely highlight the type of software tools you use, because there's no organization out there that doesn't have a little bit of internet, digital health technology, or some sort of software technology in their, whether it's a POS system, that's redundant because POS is system at the end, but things like that. So once you know what software they're looking for to have skills in, that's less training. A lot of the burden that comes from training comes from software learning. Right? So if you're already, for instance, Microsoft's a big one. If you already know, if you come in and you don't have Microsoft on your thing, but which Microsoft? So in finance, for instance, the Dynamic product from Microsoft, if you have that off the bat, people would be like, that's great. Salesforce is one of them too. Like any type of CRM that they're looking for, I think that's really good to have, even though you don't have experience in the industry specifically. And secondly is, I would say, if your resume is not up to a paid position, right? Because they're paying you to learn, right? A lot of organizations don't have the luxury to do that. So come prepared. Volunteer for a bunch of stuff, whether it's a bunch of part-time, it doesn't have to be full-time volunteer. It could be part-time volunteers in industry that is applicable to where you want to go. So if you're volunteering, let's say in my field, so let's say you're volunteer for a veterinarian clinic, but then you want to apply for human healthcare. I mean, there are transferable skills, but the closer you can get to what we're looking for, the better chance that we won't weed you out. So that's one. You can stay diverse. You can, and honestly, it's the people, right? Sometimes if you don't want to get weeded out, you go by email. And back then, you can used to go in person, but sometimes reaching out to do, everyone loves free work. So if you're here to volunteer or get into the door, have a coffee, bring coffee for one of the executives, try to get in the door for like 5 minutes, like that, going back to the elevator pitch. I think that's what makes you stand out as a candidate. But as a university student, you're not going to have a lot of paid working experience, right? So it's important to leverage your network and do a lot of volunteering work.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot of value that goes into volunteer work and a lot of clubs and activities that students actually can do. And keeping that in mind, sometimes I think it can also be really hard to get some of those really relevant volunteer experiences. And so I think that your point is really important, but also, you know, it's also important for students, I think, to recognize that one volunteer opportunity can lead you to the second one. And so you can take steps to get closer to it. It doesn't have to be your first opportunity, but before you apply, try to get as close as you can, from what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Yes. And there's times where, like, I would honestly, from my experience, I've literally just walked into the clinic and I was like, hey, I know about these diseases. I have a science background. I'm currently taking anatomy right now. I was like, are you interested in a volunteer? Like, this is what I'm going to do, help your clinic.
Right.
And what really stood out, and it's an underrated skill I find at that time, current state, was just being a fast typer.
Right.
They see how fast I'm typing, and a lot of these older generation organizations, they value younger candidates who are very tech savvy.
Right.
Because there's a learning curve there, and you can be there to fill out that gap.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely a gap that only this generation is able to fill kind of more effectively, or hopefully everyone can, but just, you know, sometimes that transition is easier, as you said. And can I ask, so in terms of students, like, what advice would you give to those of them that are trying to break into this industry?
Specifically healthcare?
Yeah.
I think that coming from, so my parents were refugees, right? So I'm like second generation. I think there's a lot of pressure because they're in their bubble, right? And if you coming from different countries, you'll find that your career trajectory is black and white. Like, Canada is probably one of the only countries here where you do undergrad and then go to medical school. Other countries, by like 12 years old, like if you're going to science and pre-med and healthcare, by the time you hit 18, you're in medical school, right? So your career is already laid out. So with that culture type of thinking, it applies to this generation, but really that's not the case. So if you're doing a science degree and you're going into healthcare has an abundance of different subcategories you can get into. Obviously, the one that has been, you know, marketed, generationally kind of embedded, and also glamorized, like Grey's Anatomy, for instance, is being a physician, right? That's not necessarily true. There's other specialties that you can do as a licensed health professional. So there's the licensed physician assistant program, nurse practitioner, nurses, and sometimes the lifestyle is a lot better, right? So I'm in administration and management, which is extremely rewarding. There's also governance, which is policy making for healthcare as well. So that's a lot of things people don't talk about, and they don't know until later on in their career. Some people think they need to get into research and then kind of climb that academic ladder. I've done it. I actually purposely took a gap in my master's to pursuing my master's because I wanted to get a master's that was equivalent to what I decided to do. Not to do a master's just to do it.
Right.
Right? And I think that has helped me tremendously. It saved me a lot of money and time.
Yeah.
Because now what I'm doing now, I don't really need I don't need my master's, but
Yeah.
I do love learning, so yeah.
No, for sure. I definitely agree with you. Like, I think it's a lot of times we think a master's is the next step after your undergrad, but it doesn't have to be. It could be for some students, but it doesn't have to be. You can come back to it later. You might not need it for your career. And so definitely appreciate that it kind of worked out that way for you. And I really also appreciate the fact that you listed out some of those roles because a lot of students wouldn't know where to begin when it comes to finding those jobs, and so that was really helpful. And I guess really kind of when it comes to the healthcare sector, it is, as you said, very hard to get into some of the roles, especially, you know, the medicine and, you know, the ones that are more glamorized, as you said. And so what advice would you give to students that are feeling discouraged in their job search?
Yeah, definitely. So I think overall, think of community-based practices. So whether and you have to think about it. So you're looking for mom and pop shops who are stretched out and thinned out, and basically they're looking for any helping hand to help out to improve patient care, right? Our system is strained right now, and we're facing with a lot of budgets. And obviously, if you want to know about the news, you can go look at the Ontario Medical Association and what they're negotiating for and things like that. But overall, look for those mom and pop shops. So community practice clinics are mom and pop shops. Why? Because any dollar that the ministry provides to the physician, let's say, I'm making this up, let's say the physician, the ministry pays them $10. $5 is going to go to the staff. $1 is going to go to rent, right? So you're only left with really $2, right? And if you're looking for help, that's where you come in, and you obviously want to doesn't matter, you can't really pick, like you're really strained out. Pharmacies as well, you don't go to Shoppers Drug Mart and ask to volunteer right off the bat. They're gonna be like, why do we need you? But if you go to like a pharmacy shop that's family owned, again going back to that mom and pop shop, they'll be happy to have you learned. Leverage some of your network, meaning your family and friends. I think my biggest regret during studying at UTM, at U of T, is basically not going out a lot because I was so stressed, just studying all the time. But I feel like I could have attended certain events where I thought I was maybe too busy or burnt out or too cool for it. Like, you know what I mean? I think people undervalue that, and that's meaningful connections too.
Yeah.
So when you go, you have to have this mindset that you want to make meaningful connections, not to be like, go out because it's on my checklist to network, right?
Yeah.
I think once you lead with genuine connections, that will take you to a lot of places. And you have to make time to talk to people. And if you're socially awkward, that's fine too. Find a way to talk to people online, behind a screen, where it's less anxiety provoking, right? And yeah.
No, for sure. I think that there is a lot of value when it comes to those genuine connections, as you said, because that network can kind of take you from one place to the next. And I really appreciate what you said about, you know, community practices or, you know, pharmacies, those mom and shop places kind of being entry points for a lot of students that might be having a harder time. And I think that sometimes we tend to forget that when we're, you know, in that situation. So that was some really great advice, Catherine. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your team at ACIR joining us today, and thank you for filming with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.